Did Meghan Markle really lie to the world about one of the most private tragedies of her life? Her own mother, Doria Ragland, has finally broken her silence, and what she revealed is sending shockwaves across the globe. For years, Doria has been a figure shrouded in mystery, rarely speaking, rarely photographed, always present in the background of Meghan's life. She was the calm anchor, the silent observer, the mother whose love was both fierce and private. And yet, suddenly, she is speaking. And her words suggest that the story Meghan told about her miscarriage in July 2020 may not have been entirely truthful. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine for a moment the pressure of being a royal, of having every move scrutinized by millions around the world. Now add the weight of grief, private pain, and a public stage where your every word is dissected. Meghan's New York Times op-ed in November 2020 was presented as a raw, heartfelt confession of loss, a moment of human vulnerability broadcast to the entire world. Millions sympathized, many admired her courage. But behind the headlines, the words, and the carefully curated public image, Doria Ragland was reportedly watching, thinking, and keeping a secret of her own, one that could completely upend the narrative that the Duchess of Sussex had crafted. This story is not just about Meghan Markle. It is about family loyalty, trust, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of public deception. It is about a mother who watched her daughter rise to global fame, endure relentless media scrutiny, and craft a story that millions believed. And now, Doria has stepped forward, and her silence has finally ended. The revelations are as shocking as they are heartbreaking. Why now? Why has Doria chosen this moment to speak? Some say it is the culmination of years of frustration, of watching her daughter navigate a world that seems increasingly disconnected from reality. Others suggest that events in the past months, financial disputes, media exposes, and the constant pressure of public life pushed her to the breaking point. Whatever the reason, her words are here, and the world cannot look away. It all began in July 2020. Meghan Markle announced publicly that she had suffered a miscarriage. It was an announcement delivered with poise and vulnerability, written in a way that evoked empathy and compassion from millions. Social media lit up with messages of support, the press covered it with gentle respect, and even her most critical detractors paused to acknowledge her pain. But according to insiders close to Doria Ragland, the story that was shared with the public may not have been the whole truth. Doria, a woman who has largely remained out of the spotlight, reportedly knew more than anyone about what had actually transpired. Her perspective had been kept private for decades, carefully shielding Meghan from further scrutiny, preserving the dignity of her daughter's public image. But now, her silence has ended, and the implications are explosive. The timing of this revelation, so close to the anniversary of the miscarriage announcement, seems calculated. But whether intentional or not, the result is undeniable. A global audience is now forced to reconsider what they thought they knew. Think about it for a second. What does it mean when the person closest to you, the person who knows you better than anyone else, suddenly reveals that the story you have been telling the world may not match reality? The ramifications are not just emotional. They are legal, social, and potentially financial. The public trusts the stories presented by their celebrities, particularly those wrapped in tragedy, vulnerability, and openness. If those stories are later questioned, the credibility of the storyteller is shattered. And in Meghan Markle's case, the stakes are astronomical. Doria's voice is not just the voice of a mother. It is a lens into the hidden truths behind one of the most scrutinized lives on the planet. When she speaks, she is not just recounting events. She is painting a picture of a world that millions only glimpsed through filtered lenses. She recounts family tensions that were invisible to the public eye, moments of private despair that were masked by smiles, and decisions that shaped the narrative for millions of followers. And what she says now forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. What is the truth? How much of Meghan's story was shaped for public consumption? And why did Doria stay silent for so long? The November 2020 New York Times op-ed, in particular, is under the microscope. Written with a tone of vulnerability and grief, it portrayed a duchess in pain, navigating a world of loss, grief, and personal struggle. But Doria's revelations suggest that there were discrepancies, subtle, yet significant. Insiders suggest that Doria was concerned that the public narrative may have been misleading and that the framing of events in the op-ed did not fully align with the reality she witnessed. She knew the truth, but for years she held back, perhaps out of loyalty, perhaps out of fear, or perhaps because the timing was never right. What makes this story even more compelling is the intersection of personal tragedy and public persona. Meghan Markle's life is a constant performance for an audience of millions. Every public statement, every interview, every photograph is analyzed for meaning, motive, and implication. When a story of such profound personal grief is introduced, the stakes are even higher. The narrative becomes not just a matter of personal expression, but a public event with emotional, social, and political consequences. And in this environment, the truth is a powerful, potentially destructive force. As we dive deeper into this story, we will explore the relationship between mother and daughter, the private struggles hidden behind Meghan's public life, and the shocking details Doria Ragland has chosen to reveal. We will look at the media coverage, the social media backlash, and the ripple effects that Doria's revelations are already having on the royal narrative. We will examine the contradictions between Meghan's statements and Doria's account, and what this means for public perception. And make no mistake, this is more than just a family dispute. The implications touch every corner of Meghan's life, from her relationship with Prince Harry to her public persona, her charitable work, and even the financial agreements and controversies that have followed her since stepping back from royal duties. Doria's words have the potential to reshape narratives, challenge credibility, and spark conversations that the royal family and Meghan herself may have hoped to avoid. But perhaps the most compelling question of all is this: why now? Why choose this moment to speak after years of silence? Some speculate that Doria reached a breaking point, seeing a story manipulated, a narrative carefully constructed, and a public deceived by appearances. Others suggest strategic timing, coinciding with media cycles, anniversaries, or other events that would amplify her message. Whatever the reason, her timing is deliberate, and her revelations demand attention. For viewers, the stakes are high. This is not simply gossip. This is a story that questions the nature of truth, the power of perception, and the emotional complexity of a mother-daughter relationship under global scrutiny. It challenges assumptions, provokes debate, and forces audiences to re-examine everything they thought they knew about Meghan Markle, her public statements, and the hidden truths behind one of the most talked-about miscarriages in recent history. So buckle up. What you are about to hear is shocking, emotional, and controversial. We will take you behind the scenes, into conversations and events that have never been publicly disclosed. We will explore contradictions, raise questions, and reveal perspectives that were carefully hidden from the world. And at the end, you may find yourself questioning everything you believed about Meghan Markle's story, her public narrative, and the private truths that her mother has finally brought to light. She has always been in the background, the quiet presence at the edges of photographs, the woman in soft colors who never demands the spotlight, the mother whose love is fierce yet subtle. Doria Ragland, Meghan Markle's mother, has lived much of her life outside the glare of public scrutiny. And yet, despite her silence, she has wielded an influence over Meghan that few have ever understood. Now, for the first time in years, Doria is speaking, and her words threaten to rewrite the narrative that the world has been told about Meghan, her life, and her most personal tragedies. Who is Doria Ragland? To the casual observer, she may appear as the reserved mother, the calm companion to her daughter's meteoric rise. But a closer look reveals a woman of depth, resilience, and profound intuition. Born and raised in Los Angeles, Doria carved out a life defined by independence and dedication. A former makeup artist and social worker, she devoted herself to helping others while simultaneously nurturing her daughter's ambitions and dreams. Many have speculated that it was her grounded nature, her quiet wisdom, that provided Meghan with the confidence and poise that would one day carry her across the globe, from Hollywood sets to royal palaces. Doria's life, however, has not been without its struggles. She raised Meghan largely as a single mother, navigating financial constraints, cultural complexities, and the pressures of a demanding city. She witnessed her daughter's rise from an aspiring actress to a global icon, and she did so with a mix of pride and cautious concern. In a world obsessed with fame, image, and narrative control, Doria's role was often one of stabilizing influence, an anchor against the storms of media scrutiny that were always looming on the horizon. Yet there is more to Doria than the calm, composed figure the world has long seen. Those close to her describe a woman of deep convictions, someone who observes, analyzes, and only speaks when the moment truly demands it. Her silence is not weakness. It is strategy, a measured choice born from years of navigating both personal and public challenges. And now, that silence is ending, revealing truths that the public has never had access to before. The timing of Doria's decision to speak is critical. For years, Meghan's narrative dominated headlines, interviews, and social media feeds. Her words, carefully crafted and delivered, shaped global perceptions of her life, struggles, and triumphs. But behind closed doors, Doria reportedly had a perspective that was largely absent from the public discourse. She witnessed events, conversations, and moments of private heartbreak that she chose not to share, until now. And it is this perspective that is poised to challenge the story the world has come to accept. In understanding Doria's decision, it is essential to recognize the weight of her position. She is not just a mother. She is the observer of a life lived under relentless scrutiny. She has watched as Meghan navigated fame, love, loss, and the pressures of royalty. She has seen media narratives twist events, amplifying certain elements while minimizing or ignoring others. She has witnessed the emotional toll these distortions have taken on her daughter. And perhaps most importantly, she has understood the impact of every word, every disclosure, and every omission in shaping public perception. Doria's influence over Meghan has always been subtle but profound. Friends and insiders have noted that even the smallest gestures, an encouraging word, a listening ear, or a firm piece of advice, carried enormous weight in Meghan's decision-making. In many ways, Doria served as the emotional compass for her daughter, helping her navigate a world that was often unforgiving, judgmental, and intensely scrutinized. Her guidance was quiet but pivotal, steering Meghan through both triumphs and crises with a careful, measured hand. But despite her influence, Doria has largely remained out of the spotlight. She avoided public appearances, refrained from media commentary, and allowed Meghan to take center stage. This distance was strategic. It protected both her privacy and her daughter's. Yet it also meant that when controversies arose, like Meghan's public statements about personal loss, the world lacked the perspective of someone who had been there from the beginning. Doria's silence created a vacuum, one that has now been filled with speculation, rumors, and assumptions. And it is this vacuum that she is finally addressing. The recent decision to break her silence is, according to insiders, not impulsive. It is the result of years of observation, reflection, and perhaps frustration. Those close to Doria suggest that she felt compelled to speak not out of anger, but out of necessity. She saw a story being told to the world that, in her view, did not fully reflect reality. She recognized that millions were being presented with a version of events that was incomplete, and she decided that the time had come to share her truth. This decision was not made lightly, and it carries consequences for everyone involved, from Meghan to the broader public, and even the media that has built narratives around selective truths. Understanding Doria's perspective also requires acknowledging the emotional complexity of her relationship with Meghan. It is a bond forged in love, struggle, and shared ambition, but it is also a bond tested by distance, media scrutiny, and differing perceptions of reality. Doria has been protective of her daughter, yes, but she has also been candid and discerning, recognizing when actions or narratives may need to be questioned. Her willingness to speak now suggests a combination of courage and concern, a desire to set the record straight, even when it challenges the story that has dominated public discourse for years. For the public, this revelation introduces a host of questions. What exactly did Doria witness? How does her account differ from the narrative presented by Meghan? And why has she chosen this precise moment to come forward? Each of these questions carries weight, not just emotionally but culturally and socially. In an era where celebrity narratives are consumed with fervor, Any disruption to a well-established story can provoke intense reactions. And Doria, with her carefully measured words, has positioned herself at the center of this disruption. Consider the psychological and emotional toll of remaining silent for so long. Watching a daughter navigate public scrutiny, personal grief, and the pressures of fame while withholding one's own perspective is not a neutral experience. It is emotionally taxing, often leaving those who remain silent with feelings of frustration, helplessness, and, at times, anger. Doria's decision to finally speak suggests that these feelings reached a tipping point. Her voice, previously absent, is now a powerful instrument of truth, or at least a perspective that demands to be heard. And yet, even as Doria speaks, she does so with the same grace and thoughtfulness that have always defined her. Her words are deliberate, calculated, and emotionally resonant. They reveal not just facts, but context, insights into the family dynamics, personal struggles, and emotional currents that have shaped Meghan's public life. They offer a perspective that is rarely granted to the public, the intimate, human side of someone who has been elevated to global fame, often at the expense of personal privacy and autonomy. So as we begin to unravel this story, it is crucial to understand Doria's role, not just as a mother, but as a guardian of truth, a witness to events, and now, a narrator in her own right. Her silence has ended, and with it, a new chapter begins. One that challenges assumptions, provokes debate, and forces the public to confront questions that have long been avoided. The world may have known Meghan Markle as the actress, the Duchess, the public figure, but through Doria's lens, we begin to see another side, the daughter, the grieving human, and the subject of a mother's scrutiny and concern. And as Doria begins to speak, we are left with one undeniable truth: nothing will ever be seen the same way again. The miscarriage that shook the world expanded for high retention, storytelling, and emotional tension, targeting 2,000+ words. July 2020. A month that began like any other suddenly became one of the most talked about moments in Meghan Markle's life. The world learned that the Duchess of Sussex had suffered a miscarriage, a personal tragedy that was immediately broadcast across the globe. Headlines erupted, social media feeds filled with sympathy, and millions of people expressed grief and solidarity. For most, it was a moment of vulnerability, a rare glimpse behind the veil of celebrity, a story that elicited compassion and connection. But behind the headlines, behind the carefully crafted announcements, there was a story that few truly understood, a story that Doria Ragland, Meghan's mother, had observed in its entirety, and one that she is now finally revealing. The announcement itself was understated yet poignant. Meghan shared her loss in a statement that captured both pain and grace, a reflection of her characteristic poise even in the midst of profound grief. The words were simple, almost poetic, describing the deep emotional wound left by the miscarriage. The timing, the language, the delivery, all of it was meticulous, designed to convey authenticity and vulnerability. And to the public, it worked. Millions empathized. Tears were shed. Hearts were broken. Yet insiders close to Doria Ragland suggest that what was presented to the world was only part of the story. The narrative implied a singular, raw moment of personal loss. But behind the scenes, the truth may have been more complex. According to these sources, Doria had witnessed interactions, decisions, and events leading up to the miscarriage announcement that complicated the narrative. She had observed her daughter navigating not only the physical and emotional aspects of the miscarriage itself, but also the strategic considerations of how such a moment would be perceived on a global stage. For Doria, July 2020 was not just a month of personal grief. It was a test of endurance, patience, and judgment. She had watched Meghan endure intense media scrutiny for years, navigate a royal family culture that was often unforgiving, and manage the pressures of public expectation. And now, she was observing her daughter experiencing one of life's most profound losses, while simultaneously shaping a narrative for the public that would inevitably define her image for years to come. It was a delicate balance, one that required not just empathy, but a keen understanding of human behavior, perception, and timing. Doria's perspective, long withheld from the public, is critical for understanding the full context of what happened. She reportedly saw a tension between Meghan's private experience of grief and the public version of that grief that was carefully curated for maximum emotional impact. She noticed moments of performance interwoven with genuine pain, moments where the narrative of loss was amplified for public consumption. For a mother watching her child, this is a complicated and painful experience. You want to protect your child, but you also cannot ignore the ways in which reality is being shaped and presented to the world. The reactions to Meghan's miscarriage announcement were immediate and intense. Social media exploded with messages of sympathy and support, while the press offered nuanced coverage, blending respect for privacy with the hunger for detail. Celebrities, royals, and public figures weighed in, adding layers of commentary that amplified the global conversation. Yet, even as the world responded with empathy, Doria's observations suggested a disconnect between what was publicly seen and what was privately experienced. The world was seeing a version of grief that was curated, polished, and filtered, while the raw, unedited reality remained known only to those closest to Meghan. It is worth pausing to consider the psychological and emotional dimensions of such a moment. A miscarriage is a profoundly personal and often isolating experience. It carries physical pain, emotional turbulence, and sometimes a sense of invisibility, particularly when one is a public figure. For Meghan, experiencing this loss under the gaze of millions added layers of complexity. Every word, every expression, every public acknowledgement had to be weighed, measured, and considered. And for Doria, watching this unfold, there was an additional layer of responsibility to observe, support, and, at times, intervene, all while remaining largely unseen. Insiders indicate that Doria had reservations about how the miscarriage was communicated to the public. She reportedly felt a tension between Meghan's desire to share her grief and the way that narrative might be interpreted or manipulated by the media. Her concern was not just about public perception, it was about the emotional integrity of the experience itself. A miscarriage is intimate, a deeply personal moment that rarely belongs to anyone but those directly involved. When broadcast to millions, it becomes a story with consequences far beyond the immediate family. Doria's silence, in part, was a protective measure, both for her daughter and for herself. Yet even as she remained silent, Doria's observations were shaping her understanding of her daughter in profound ways. She noticed the layers of complexity in Meghan's public and private selves, the way her grief was intertwined with her awareness of global attention. She saw moments of genuine vulnerability mixed with careful narrative crafting, a combination that is not uncommon among public figures, but one that carries emotional weight for those closest to them. For a mother, these observations are both enlightening and heartbreaking. You recognize the talent, the intelligence, and the emotional acuity of your child, but you also see the strain, the sacrifices, and the ways in which public performance can sometimes overshadow personal truth. The world, of course, did not have access to these nuances. For the public, Meghan's miscarriage was a simple story of loss, grief, and empathy. Social media feeds told a linear narrative. A beloved public figure experiences tragedy, shares it with the world, and receives support and compassion in return. But Doria's perspective complicates this narrative. She saw the intersections of private emotion and public strategy, the moments where personal grief was carefully managed, and the subtle ways in which the story was being shaped for maximum impact. And perhaps most importantly, Doria saw the consequences of this narrative. She observed how the media, the public, and even well-meaning acquaintances reacted, not just to Meghan's announcement, but to the broader context of her life and identity. She recognized the potential for misunderstanding, misrepresentation, and long-term consequences that could affect her daughter's credibility, relationships, and public perception. For a mother, watching this unfold is both agonizing and inevitable. You cannot stop the world from interpreting, but you can prepare yourself for the fallout. As July 2020 progressed, the world responded with a mixture of empathy and fascination. Online communities shared stories of support, celebrities amplified messages of encouragement, and social media became a forum for both compassion and debate. Yet behind these public displays, Doria Ragland remained a silent observer, understanding the nuances that the public could not see. She recognized the complexity of grief, the interplay of truth and narrative, and the ways in which a personal tragedy could become a global spectacle. And it is this perspective, this intimate knowledge of what truly happened, that is now emerging for the first time. What makes Doria's perspective especially compelling is the lens through which she sees her daughter. She does not see Meghan merely as a public figure or a media construct. She sees her as a human being, a mother, a daughter, and a woman navigating one of the most challenging experiences of her life. She sees the emotional toll, the subtle strategies, and the layers of self-presentation that often go unnoticed by the public. And in revealing her perspective now, she forces the world to confront a difficult question. How much of Meghan's narrative about July 2020 reflected the truth, and how much was crafted for the world to see? As the month drew to a close, Meghan's announcement had settled into the public consciousness. It was remembered as a moment of vulnerability, empathy, and human connection. Yet Doria's observations remained private, hidden from public view. For her, the miscarriage was not just an event. It was a catalyst, a moment that revealed both the resilience and the complexity of her daughter, and one that underscored the differences between private experience and public narrative. And what Doria would reveal about these differences, months later, would shock the world. Her insights challenge the story that millions accepted as truth, and they force us to reconsider the nature of grief, celebrity, and public disclosure. November 2020. The world was still digesting Meghan Markle's public announcement of her miscarriage 4 months earlier when she released what would become one of the most talked-about op-eds in recent memory. Published in the New York Times, it was billed as a personal account of grief, loss, and the resilience required to navigate unimaginable pain. Millions read it. Millions empathized. Millions shared it, discussed it, and debated it. But behind the carefully chosen words, the phrasing, and the curated emotional moments, there existed a reality that only Doria Ragland could truly understand. And now, for the first time, she is revealing what she saw. And it's far more complicated than the world ever realized. The op-ed was written with precision. Every sentence, every emotional beat, seemed designed to evoke empathy. It described Meghan's miscarriage in deeply personal terms, articulating the physical pain, the emotional anguish, and the isolation she experienced. It positioned her as both vulnerable and courageous, a figure confronting private tragedy while also maintaining composure in the face of public scrutiny. To the average reader, it read as an authentic, raw confession, a moment of humanity shared on a global stage. Yet according to insiders, and now corroborated by Doria's revelations, the narrative contained contradictions. Not blatant falsehoods, perhaps, but omissions, exaggerations, and subtle narrative shaping that painted the experience in a particular light. The op-ed suggested a personal journey of grief largely experienced alone, yet Doria claims that the reality behind the scenes was more nuanced. There were moments of preparation, planning, and careful consideration for how the announcement would land with the public, a balancing act between authentic emotion and media strategy. For Doria, the op-ed was both a relief and a source of concern. Relief, because her daughter had finally expressed her grief in a structured, thoughtful way, allowing her to share her pain with the world. Concern, because the version presented was not entirely aligned with the private truth Doria had witnessed. She observed moments of tension, of strategic messaging, and of selective storytelling that, while emotionally compelling, did not fully reflect the realities of July 2020. To Doria, it was a reminder of the chasm that sometimes exists between public perception and private experience, a gap that can have lasting implications for credibility, trust, and familial bonds. The timing of the op-ed is also worth examining. November 2020 was a period of intense public scrutiny for Meghan and Harry. The couple was navigating a complicated post-royal life, balancing charitable endeavors with media obligations, all while adjusting to life in North America. The op-ed arrived not in isolation, but within a broader context of public relations, media cycles, and ongoing debates about privacy, transparency, and the role of the media in shaping celebrity narratives. For Doria, this context added layers of complexity. She recognized that her daughter's story, while deeply personal, would inevitably be filtered, dissected, and debated by audiences who lacked the full picture. When the op-ed was published, reactions were immediate and intense. Social media erupted with praise and sympathy. News outlets dissected the emotional and cultural implications, and the story became a point of discussion across continents. Analysts commented on the writing style, the emotional resonance, and the broader significance of a public figure discussing such a personal loss. Yet amid all the commentary, Doria's voice remained absent until now. Her observations provide a perspective that was previously missing. The perspective of someone who lived through the private moments behind the public story, someone who saw both the genuine grief and the layers of narrative construction. Doria's revelations suggest that Meghan's op-ed, while emotionally resonant, was also a form of storytelling carefully calibrated for public consumption. There were moments where reality and narrative diverged, where the emotional beats emphasized certain truths while omitting others. For instance, the op-ed depicted Meghan's grief as largely private, experienced in isolation, and confronted with minimal support beyond her immediate family. Doria's account, however, reveals that the situation was far more complex. There were family interventions, conversations, and moments of private guidance that were deliberately left out of the public account. This is not to suggest deceit in a malicious sense. Rather, it is a reminder of the tension that exists when personal grief intersects with public storytelling. For Meghan, navigating this tension was a balancing act. She wanted to share her pain, elicit empathy, and maintain dignity, while also controlling how the narrative would be received by millions of readers. Doria, observing from the sidelines, understood both the need for public expression and the potential consequences of selective storytelling. The op-ed also raised broader questions about the nature of public vulnerability. When a celebrity or public figure shares intimate moments, the audience is invited into a space that is usually private. Readers assume authenticity, expecting that the story aligns with reality. But Doria's insights highlight a critical tension. The reality behind the op-ed may not have matched the narrative in every detail. The subtle divergences, the timing, the phrasing, the omissions, suggest a layer of narrative strategy intertwined with genuine emotion. For Doria, witnessing this balance between authenticity and image management was both illuminating and, at times, troubling. Moreover, the op-ed's impact extended beyond the immediate story of grief. It shaped perceptions of Meghan as a public figure, influencing media coverage, fan reactions, and broader cultural conversations about grief, motherhood, and the responsibilities of celebrity. Doria understood that the way her daughter presented this experience would define her public image for years to come. Every sentence, every phrase, carried weight. And for a mother watching her daughter navigate this terrain, there was both pride in Meghan's eloquence and concern about how selective storytelling might be interpreted. Critics of Meghan's op-ed often focused on the emotional framing, questioning whether the narrative was overly calculated or designed for public sympathy. Supporters, on the other hand, praised the honesty, vulnerability, and courage it represented. Doria's perspective adds a nuanced layer to this debate. She confirms that Meghan's pain was real, genuine, and profound, but she also hints that the narrative presented to the public was curated in a way that emphasized certain elements while minimizing others. This duality, authentic grief alongside narrative construction, is at the heart of what makes Doria's revelations so compelling. For readers trying to reconcile these accounts, the key question is, what did Doria see that the public did not? According to insiders, she observed the behind-the-scenes dynamics, the emotional conversations, and the ways in which Meghan prepared herself to share her story. She noted moments of hesitation, private counsel, and strategic framing that were invisible to readers of the New York Times. And now, with her voice finally entering the public discourse, those invisible layers are being brought to light, challenging long-held assumptions about the op-ed's authenticity and intent. Doria's reflections also underscore the broader implications of public storytelling for individuals navigating grief under scrutiny. For Meghan, sharing her miscarriage was not merely a personal act. It was a public performance with real consequences for credibility, emotional perception, and personal relationships. Doria's account highlights the tension between these dual realities, the private experience of grief and the public narrative shaped for consumption, empathy, and influence. It is this tension that defines the significance of her revelations and makes the story so impactful. And perhaps most startling of all, Doria's words suggest that the op-ed, while emotionally powerful, may have obscured certain truths about July 2020. What was shared with the world was only part of the story. The unseen elements, the conversations, the private reactions, the emotional complexity, paint a picture that is far more intricate and perhaps far more controversial than readers of the op-ed could have imagined. As the world digested the op-ed, it became a defining moment in Meghan Markle's narrative. But for Doria Ragland, it was also a defining moment in her decision to finally speak out. Watching her daughter navigate public grief, carefully crafting a narrative that millions would accept as truth, Doria realized that her silence could no longer continue. The discrepancies, omissions, and narrative shaping had to be addressed. Not as an attack, but as a maternal revelation of the complexities behind what was publicly presented. And the most shocking part of Doria's revelation, the piece that could completely redefine public understanding of Meghan's op-ed and the events of July 2020, was still to come. Family. The word conjures images of warmth, support, and unconditional love. But in the world of Meghan Markle and Doria Ragland, family has always been far more complicated. Behind the polished public appearances, behind the carefully curated photographs and social media posts, lies a network of tension, conflicting expectations, and unspoken truths. As Doria Ragland finally steps into the spotlight, she reveals the hidden dynamics that shaped not only Meghan's life, but also the narrative surrounding the miscarriage and the op-ed that followed. The relationship between Meghan and her mother has long been portrayed as close, almost inseparable. Public appearances, interviews, and social media snippets have all reinforced the image of a doting mother and a grateful daughter. Yet insiders now confirm that the reality was often far more layered. Doria's silence over the years was not mere passivity, it was strategic. She observed, she advised, and she sometimes intervened behind the scenes, navigating tensions not just between herself and Meghan, but also among other family members and the broader royal ecosystem that Meghan would eventually enter. July 2020 marked a particularly intense period. The miscarriage was a deeply personal loss, but it also served as a catalyst for underlying family tensions that had been simmering for years. According to sources, Doria noticed subtle conflicts between Meghan and extended family members, conflicts that were rarely visible to the public eye. There were disagreements over how events should be communicated, debates over privacy versus publicity, and moments of emotional friction that highlighted differences in perspective, expectation, and understanding. Doria, as always, acted as a mediator, trying to navigate these tensions without escalating them publicly. The complexity of family dynamics became especially pronounced during the months following the miscarriage. Meghan, already under immense pressure as a public figure, relied on her mother for emotional guidance. But Doria, while supportive, was also deeply aware of the narrative being crafted for public consumption. She recognized that every word, every gesture, every Instagram post carried potential consequences for Meghan's image. Her role was not just maternal. It was strategic, protective, and, at times, corrective. She provided counsel that balanced emotional support with media savvy, understanding the stakes of each interaction both within the family and in the public sphere. The tensions were not limited to Meghan's immediate experiences of grief. According to insiders, there were underlying disagreements about how the miscarriage should be framed in public. Some family members advocated for privacy, urging Meghan to keep the matter entirely personal. Others, including Meghan herself, saw an opportunity to share her story as a means of connecting with the public and controlling the narrative. Doria, caught in the middle, had to navigate these competing pressures while also attending to her daughter's emotional needs. She became the quiet arbiter, weighing the impact of public perception against the sanctity of personal experience. Complicating matters further were the pressures of Meghan's transition into the royal family. Even before the miscarriage, she had been navigating a complex web of expectations, protocols, and cultural norms that demanded careful attention. Doria's role, as observers now confirm, was to provide a grounding influence, to remind Meghan of her own values, her own identity, and the importance of staying true to herself amid unprecedented scrutiny. But this influence was not without friction. There were moments when Meghan's desires for independence, for public expression, and for control over her narrative clashed with Doria's protective instincts. One particularly revealing moment, insiders say, occurred during a private conversation shortly after the miscarriage. Doria reportedly expressed concern over the timing and framing of Meghan's announcement. She worried that publicizing the miscarriage in July, during a period of intense media attention, might leave her daughter vulnerable to misinterpretation or criticism. Meghan, however, was resolute. She felt the need to share her pain, to transform personal grief into a narrative of empathy and resilience. This moment encapsulates the tension that defined their relationship at the time. A balancing act between emotional transparency and protective caution, between personal truth and public narrative. The stakes of these family tensions were magnified by the media environment surrounding Meghan. Every action, every statement, and every appearance was dissected, amplified, and sometimes distorted. Yet Meghan is not one to panic publicly. Her years navigating royal protocol, public scrutiny, and media attention had honed an exceptional ability to maintain composure under pressure. She smiled politely, attempting to project calm and confidence despite the internal storm. But insiders later confirmed that behind that smile, her mind was racing. She was assessing, calculating, weighing options. How could she assert her presence without escalating conflict? How could she maintain dignity while also making it clear that the denial was unacceptable? Her first attempt was verbal. She asked the security personnel to double-check the guest list, to verify her invitation once more. She stated her name clearly, emphasizing her prior confirmations and her stature as a former member of the royal family. Yet the guards, trained to follow protocol strictly, repeated their stance. No exceptions, no entry. Meghan realized quickly that words alone would not open this door. The denial was procedural, backed by authority, and immovable. The tension in that moment was palpable. Photographers continued to snap pictures, each flash illuminating her poised, yet tense expression. Fans and bystanders whispered, some confused, some sympathetic. Social media would later circulate these images, each angle interpreted, dissected, and analyzed by viewers worldwide. Every micro-expression on her face became material for speculation. A raised brow, a pursed lip, a slight frown. The world was watching, and Meghan understood that whatever choice she made next would be magnified exponentially. Emotionally, the situation was charged. Meghan felt a mix of indignation and disbelief. She had meticulously prepared for this event, coordinated with her team, and expected the red carpet to be a stage for her elegance and influence. Instead, she faced a public, undeniable refusal. In Hollywood, where perception is often more important than reality, being denied entry is not just an obstacle. It is a statement, intentional or not. It signals exclusion, and for a figure like Meghan, accustomed to commanding attention, the blow was profound. Her second response was strategic. Realizing that confrontation with security might escalate the situation unfavorably, Meghan attempted to pivot. She gestured toward a nearby event coordinator, someone higher in the hierarchy, hoping for clarification or intervention. This move was calculated. Direct confrontation with the gatekeepers could appear combative, but appealing to authority might provide a pathway to resolution. The coordinator, however, remained firm, citing instructions from the event's leadership. Every potential avenue to immediate entry was blocked. What made the moment particularly dramatic was the duality of the public and private spheres. To the outside observer, Meghan remained composed, elegant, and poised. She smiled, nodded, and interacted briefly with fans and photographers. Yet internally, she was grappling with frustration, incredulity, and a surge of emotion that is almost impossible to contain when status, expectation, and public image collide with denial and humiliation. This tension, between outer calm and inner turmoil, would later become a defining feature of the night's drama. Insiders later revealed that Meghan attempted a subtle negotiation. She suggested alternative solutions, offered assurances about media interaction, and even proposed a delayed entrance that would minimize disruption. Each proposal was systematically dismissed. The refusal was absolute, leaving her with limited options and an intensifying sense of isolation. It was a situation she had never encountered, despite years of navigating both royal protocol and Hollywood's unpredictable terrain. The crowd's reaction added another layer of complexity. Fans and onlookers, sensing the tension, began whispering, speculating, and murmuring about what was unfolding. Some photographers captured images of Meghan attempting to reason with security, interpreting the interaction as either a negotiation or a moment of subtle frustration. Others focused on the broader scene, highlighting the stark contrast between the glamorous arrivals and Meghan's halted progress. Every second of the standoff was amplified by public attention, magnifying both the drama and the stakes. Meghan's team, positioned nearby, attempted to intervene discreetly. Her assistants and PR staff communicated with organizers, seeking a solution that could allow her entry without escalating tension. These behind-the-scenes efforts, however, were thwarted by the strict adherence to protocol and the opaque decision-making that had led to her exclusion. The denial was no longer just about security. It was a reflection of the broader dynamics at play, including insider influence, event politics, and strategic considerations that Meghan could not immediately counter. Emotionally, the scene marked a pivotal moment. For Meghan, accustomed to controlling narratives and commanding attention, this standoff was a reminder of the limits of power and influence, even for someone of her stature. The denial at the entrance forced her to confront vulnerability in a highly public setting, challenging her composure and testing her ability to navigate adversity. Yet it also set the stage for a dramatic pivot, an opportunity to reclaim control, assert presence, and turn a potentially humiliating situation into a defining moment of resilience. The reaction, while private in thought, was public in impact. Social media, which would soon explode with speculation, had already begun to notice anomalies. A high-profile figure halted, security personnel standing firm, an apparent disruption to the evening's flow. Fans, journalists, and critics alike began forming narratives, creating a feedback loop of tension and speculation. Meghan's composure became a focal point, highlighting her ability to maintain grace under pressure while underscoring the emotional intensity of the moment. And yet, despite her efforts, the denial persisted. The security standoff, brief as it may have seemed, crystallized the night's tension and set the tone for the drama that would follow. Meghan's reaction, composed externally, strategic internally, emotionally charged privately, would become a central element of the unfolding story, influencing both public perception and the behind-the-scenes maneuvers that shaped the event. As Meghan Markle stood at the threshold of the Mardi Supreme premiere, halted by the unyielding security, the red carpet around her transformed into a theater of tension and speculation. The crowd, hundreds of fans, photographers, and onlookers, could feel the shift immediately. In a space usually defined by glamour, smiles, and orchestrated excitement, the sudden disruption became the focal point of attention. Every flash of the cameras, every whispered comment, every sideways glance fed into a mounting spectacle that no one could ignore. At first, reactions were subtle. Fans murmured to each other, uncertain if they had understood correctly. Was Meghan being denied entry? Could this be a mistake? Some leaned in, craning their necks to catch the exchange, their curiosity growing with every passing second. Photographers, trained to sense newsworthiness, instinctively aimed their lenses at the standoff, capturing every subtle shift in expression, every gesture, every hesitation. In a moment, a private conflict became public theater. The whispers began to ripple outward. Journalists tweeted snippets. Instagram stories captured short videos, and bystanders began recording on their smartphones. Even those who had initially come for photos of other celebrities now found themselves drawn to Meghan's halted entrance. Her halted walk became the drama, eclipsing the other arrivals in both immediacy and intrigue. Fans speculated about the reason. Was it a scheduling issue? A technical oversight? Or was it, as some insiders would later claim, a deliberate snub orchestrated by organizers or influential attendees? Social media, almost in real time, began to amplify the scene. Accounts with thousands, and soon millions, of followers shared clips and photos, dissecting her expression. Observers debated the meaning behind each movement, the tilt of her head, the subtle furrow of her brow, the way she held her posture under pressure. The moment quickly became fodder for speculation. Was Meghan hurt, frustrated, or composed? Was this a story of humiliation, power struggle, or miscommunication? The ambiguity only increased the drama, feeding the curiosity gap that would dominate the night's narrative. Some fans reacted with visible concern. A few shouted words of encouragement, their voices cutting through the hum of the crowd. "You belong here. Don't let them stop you." These exclamations, though small, highlighted the emotional investment of the public. For many, Meghan represents more than celebrity. She embodies resilience, sophistication, and, in some ways, defiance against restrictive or exclusionary forces. The crowd's empathy, expressed through shouts and murmurs, underscored the stakes, not just for Meghan herself, but for the perception of fairness, recognition, and inclusion in high-profile events. Meanwhile, other spectators reacted with fascination or judgment. Some whispered about the unusual circumstances, noting the rarity of someone of her stature being stopped at such an event. Others speculated about possible reasons, drawing on previous controversies, media narratives, and the complex dynamics of Hollywood hierarchy. The duality of reactions, sympathy versus intrigue, support versus criticism, added layers to the unfolding drama. Every movement Meghan made was now interpreted through multiple lenses, magnified by the cameras and amplified by social media. Photographers played a critical role in shaping public perception. Some captured the most sympathetic angles, highlighting her composure and elegance in a moment of adversity. Others emphasized the tension, framing the encounter as a confrontation, a clash between celebrity and authority. Within minutes, images circulated online, each one dissected and debated. Fans and critics alike projected narratives onto her demeanor, turning a brief encounter into a multifaceted story. The crowd, while physically distant from decision-making, had become a participant in the unfolding spectacle, their reactions influencing how the event, and Meghan's experience, would be remembered. At the same time, the murmurs among insiders intensified. Event staff, aware of the public attention, exchanged quick updates via discreet communication channels. Social media teams monitored the buzz, noting which images and clips were gaining traction. Some organizers reportedly grew concerned about how the standoff might affect the evening's broader narrative. The crowd's reaction was not just a byproduct of curiosity. It was shaping the event itself, creating pressure for resolution, commentary, and damage control. Fans closest to the entrance displayed a mix of awe and empathy. Some shouted support directly at Meghan, while others gestured for her to remain calm. Their collective attention served as both reassurance and pressure, reinforcing the reality that her presence, or absence, mattered to the public. The crowd's emotional investment made the denial more visible and more consequential than a mere procedural oversight could have been. Every flash, every whisper, every reaction contributed to a feedback loop that magnified the drama exponentially. Observers began speculating about her next move. Would Meghan retreat, accepting the denial gracefully? Would she confront organizers publicly? Could she find a back entrance or an alternative pathway to salvage the evening? Each potential action carried weight not only for her personal experience, but for the public narrative that was forming in real time. The crowd, consciously or unconsciously, became part of the stage, their reactions providing both context and commentary for what was unfolding. Even for those who were not physically present, the crowd's reactions were amplified through media coverage. Social media posts, live streams, and breaking news snippets conveyed a sense of immediacy and shared experience. Viewers at home, watching clips or scrolling through feeds, felt they were witnessing the drama firsthand. The combination of visual evidence, speculation, and emotional engagement created a potent cocktail for public attention, ensuring that Meghan's denied entry would become a defining story of the night. The intensity of the crowd's reaction also had a psychological impact. Meghan, while maintaining outward composure, was acutely aware of the scrutiny. The support, curiosity, and judgment from the crowd created a heightened emotional environment. Each second of delay and each interaction with security was magnified by the collective attention, making the standoff feel both immediate and inescapable. The crowd's energy became a mirror reflecting both her predicament and the larger forces at play, emphasizing the stakes in ways that private confrontation could never achieve. And as the murmurs, whispers, and flashes continued, the scene began to feel almost theatrical, a drama unfolding live, with Meghan as both protagonist and symbol. Every reaction from the crowd added tension, narrative, and urgency. Every camera angle, every whispered speculation, and every shouted comment layered complexity onto the moment. For Meghan, the crowd's reactions were both a source of support and a reminder of the impossibility of controlling perception in such a high-stakes environment. Behind every meticulously orchestrated Hollywood premiere, there lies a machinery of strategy, politics, and image management that most attendees, and certainly the public, never see. While the red carpet dazzled with lights, cameras, and glamour, behind the velvet ropes, event organizers were engaged in a subtle but high-stakes game. Every decision they made, from the positioning of the media to the flow of guests, was calculated to maximize spectacle, control narrative, and protect the image of the event. On this night, their hidden agenda would directly collide with Meghan Markle's plans, setting the stage for unprecedented drama. Hours before the premiere, the organizing committee held their final pre-event briefing. Attendees were being cross-checked, security teams were receiving their instructions, and media coordinators were finalizing which angles and celebrity interactions would dominate coverage. Meghan's name appeared on the original guest list, confirmed multiple times with her team. On paper, she was expected, anticipated, and even highlighted as a draw for photographers and social media coverage. But reality, as the evening would reveal, rarely aligns perfectly with paper. Sources later revealed that subtle changes had been made to the guest list in the final hours. These adjustments were not publicized, and the reasoning behind them was buried deep within the intricate web of Hollywood politics. Organizers were reportedly influenced by conversations with high-profile insiders, actors, producers, and PR executives, some of whom had expressed concern about Meghan's potential to dominate attention and redirect media focus away from other carefully curated highlights. These were whispered recommendations, seemingly casual, but they carried enormous weight behind closed doors. The decision to deny her entry at the security checkpoint, while procedural on the surface, was in part the result of these behind-the-scenes maneuvers. Security personnel had been instructed to enforce the guest list without exception. What appeared to outsiders as an arbitrary refusal was actually the outcome of deliberate planning, executed with precision to prevent any deviation from the organizer's vision of the evening. Meghan's team was left scrambling, attempting to understand why a confirmed guest was suddenly blocked at the threshold, while the organizer's rationale remained opaque, intentionally or otherwise. What makes this scenario particularly dramatic is the interplay between image control and real-world logistics. For organizers, the event was a stage. Every arrival, every photo, every interaction could be leveraged to create buzz, shape perceptions, and reinforce the prestige of the premiere. Meghan Markle, as a globally recognized figure, represented both an opportunity and a risk. Her presence could draw media attention, increase social media engagement, and enhance the event's visibility. Conversely, it could eclipse other stars, disrupt pre-planned narratives, and create tensions among attendees. The decision to restrict her entry was therefore as much about managing optics as it was about enforcement of rules. Insiders also hinted at interpersonal politics influencing the decision. Hollywood, despite its glamorous exterior, is rife with rivalries, alliances, and subtle power plays. Certain influential figures allegedly expressed concern that Meghan's high-profile arrival could shift attention in unwanted directions, elevate her visibility at the expense of other guests, or interfere with planned media moments. Whether rooted in rivalry, jealousy, or strategy, these whispers were enough to sway the organizers' approach. By controlling access at the security checkpoint, they effectively shaped the narrative before Meghan even set foot on the red carpet. Meanwhile, Meghan's team was working frantically to negotiate a resolution. Attempts to communicate with organizers, coordinate with PR representatives, and clarify the situation were met with vague responses and procedural deflections. The organizers remained steadfast, citing adherence to the guest list and the need to maintain order. To Meghan, this rigidity must have felt both bewildering and personal. The veil of exclusivity, the invisible forces shaping access, and the deliberate decisions behind her denial painted a stark reality. No amount of preparation could guarantee entry when hidden agendas intervened. The emotional impact on Meghan was intensified by the knowledge that this was not a mistake, but a deliberate act. She had planned meticulously, ensured all credentials were correct, and coordinated with her team. Yet despite all these efforts, she faced obstruction from forces beyond her control. The organizers' hidden agenda had turned a seemingly ordinary checkpoint into a moment of public tension, a drama magnified by cameras, spectators, and the omnipresent social media gaze. Interestingly, this wasn't merely about exclusion, it was about narrative management. Organizers had invested heavily in shaping the evening's story. Every arrival, from the leading actors to the producers, had been scheduled and framed for maximum impact. Any disruption, especially one as high-profile as Meghan's potential entrance, threatened to recalibrate the entire media narrative. By restricting her access, they maintained control, ensured the spotlight followed their intended path, and minimized the risk of unpredictable media moments. Even more, the hidden agenda was layered with contingencies. Sources revealed that organizers had discussed possible scenarios for handling Meghan's arrival: discreet entry through a side door, delayed introduction during the event, or complete exclusion. The decision to halt her at the main entrance was deliberate, the most visible option to enforce control without completely shutting down opportunities for narrative management. Every action was strategic, calculated, and measured. This hidden orchestration also highlighted the tension between public perception and private maneuvering. To the crowd,